Welcome to Reading Between the Lines, Women in Japanese Contemporary Literary Fiction. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ginger Byrne with the Japan America Society of Tennessee. Our special guest host this evening is Masami Tyson. Masami will be joined by our esteemed panel of guest readers, Dr. Cynthia Bisson, Dr. Fusae Ekida, and Dr. Noriko Horiguchi. This is the third of 4 2020 Women's Leadership Forum sessions presented by JAST, and thanks to the generous contributions of our premier corporate sponsors. Presenting sponsor, Mitsui & Company USA Inc., event patron, Nissan North America, event sponsors, BNA Nashville International Airport, Aviation Golf Classic, Bridgestone Americas Trust Fund, Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, the Mitsui USA Foundation, the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, and Fifth Third Bank. We are very excited about this interactive discussion of life in contemporary Japan as revealed through writer Sayaka Murata's semi-autobiographical novel, Convenience Store Woman. At the end of the book discussion by Masami and our guest readers, there will be time for questions. You may submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. After you click on the Q&A button, you will see a Submit a Question prompt. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest host, Masami Tyson. Masami was born and raised in Yokohama. She is a writer and received her Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University and was a recipient of the Lewis Sudler Prize in the Arts for her collection of poetry. Masami taught writing workshops to graduate students at the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins and to Tennessee high school students prior to earning her Doctor of Jurisprudence at Vanderbilt Law School. After a 20-year career in law as a federal law clerk, litigator, and in-house counsel at several global companies, Masami now serves as the Global Director of Foreign Direct Investment and Trade for the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. Masami says she is married to a wonderful husband and has 3 awesome children. Masami?
Thank you, Ginger, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I am Masami Tyson, and I am very honored to be your host and moderator, facilitator today, and hopefully also share with you some of my thoughts and insights about this very interesting, shall we say, or curious novel, Convenience Store Women. But I am also very honored to be joined today by 3 very distinguished guests, our guest readers. And I will ask now for them, the 3 of them, to please turn on their cameras as I begin introducing them. So if the 3 guests, yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce our distinguished guests today in alphabetical order. First, I'm going to start with Dr. Cynthia Bisson. Dr. Bisson is an assistant professor at Belmont University here in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Bisson was born in the heart of the bluegrass in Lexington, Kentucky, and she grew up in Paducah. Now, as a child, though, even as a child, she would visit Nashville frequently. So when she joined the Belmont faculty in 1987, it was a sort of homecoming. Dr. Bisson attended The Ohio State University, receiving her doctorate in history. Now, currently at Belmont, she teaches several courses in various fields, both in history of both Japan and France, that include the French Revolution, the samurai, Japanese warrior, and modern Japan. She also teaches world history, modern China, and a survey of East Asian history. Now, Dr. Bisson has published book reviews and contributed to entries in Historical Dictionary on World War II France. Her horizons as a teacher expanded in May of 2008 when she took her first trip to Japan as part of Belmont's study abroad program. Since then, she has led 3 study abroad trips to Japan And one of her greatest joys as a teacher, she says, is to take students on these trips and watch them learn more about Japan, the Japanese people, and themselves. In 2010, through a Japan Foundation grant, Dr. Bisson was able to spend time in Uji and Kyoto conducting research into Japanese tea culture. Currently, she is reading about French views of Japan's culture during the Meiji era in an effort to combine her interests in Japan and France. That must be a very interesting perspective. Now, in her free time, Dr. Bisson enjoys reading classic novels, gardening, watching foreign films, primarily French and Japanese ones, of course, and listening to jazz. She also enjoys spending time with her husband, their son Richard, and also with her parents, siblings, friends, and students. So welcome, Dr. Bisson. We are so glad you're with us today. Next, we have Dr. Fusae Ekida, who is an assistant professor of Japanese in the Department of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Dr. Ekida received her bachelor's degree from Yamaguchi Prefectural University. She has her first master's degree from Ohio State University. Oh, so both of you were at Ohio State. And then also in 2002, she received her second master's degree at the University of Washington. She also received her PhD from the University of Washington as well. Now, Dr. Ekida, with her master's degree in foreign language education from Ohio State, she is an expert in Japanese language education, and she has taught Japanese language at various universities in 3 different countries: Japan, the United Kingdom, and now here in the United States. And then from the University of Washington, both her master's and doctorate degrees are in Japanese literature. While Dr. Ekida's primary research interest is in the 8th century anthology of Japanese poetry, Manyoshu, Dr. Ekida has a wide range of research interests, ranging from historical linguistics to Japanese classical literature, including waka poetry and no theater. Welcome, Dr. Ekida. Thank you for joining us today. And then last, but of course not least, we have Dr. Noriko Horiguchi, who is an associate professor of modern Japanese literature at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Dr. Horiguchi's research interests include post-colonial studies, gender studies, and cultural studies. She received her bachelor's degree in English literature from Kobe Jogakuin, and then her master's in American literature at Millersville University, and then her PhD in Japanese literature at the University of Pennsylvania, and she has also studied both at Bryn Mawr and Yale universities. Now, during her tenure at University of Tennessee at Knoxville, Dr. Horiguchi has also held visiting scholarships at the University of Tokyo and Kyoto University, and visiting associate professorships at Kobe University, the University of Pennsylvania, and Josai International University in Japan. Her first monograph, called Women Adrift, The Literature of Japan's Imperial Body, analyzes how women figured in the expansion of the national body of the empire. The publication of Women Adrift led to numerous invited talks in the US, UK, and Japan, including at the University of California at Berkeley, the Library of Congress, at Cambridge, Oxford, the University of London, and Ochanomizu University. Currently, Dr. Horiguchi is preparing her second book manuscript on food narratives, another interesting topic, and memories in modern Japan. Part of her argument on this topic can be read in The Devouring Empire, Food and Memory in Hayashi Fumiko's Wartime Narratives and Naruse Mikio's Films. In Devouring Japan, Global Perspectives on Japanese Culinary Identity. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Horiguchi. Welcome. So needless to say, we have a great panel of very distinguished guests and experts in various areas, which are all relevant to our discussion today. Now, before I start our discussion on this book, I just wanted to tell our audience that, as Ginger mentioned earlier, please feel free to use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar to type in any questions that you might have throughout our discussion. The questions I will actually get to at the end of the discussion, but as I said, please feel free to go ahead and start typing them. We also welcome any comments that you might have, feedback that you may want to share with us throughout the discussion. So please do utilize that button. So now I'd like to start our discussion. So as I said, and I hope that people who have joined us today, both those who have read this book and who have not yet had a chance to read this book, will be able to take something away from our discussion. So especially for the benefit of those who have not yet had a chance to read this book, I wanted to start by laying the background a little bit. And then also for our American audiences, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of larger topics here. First, the Japanese convenience store. Obviously, that is, if you will, one of the main characters of this book. Now, our Japanese audiences know we refer to the Japanese convenience store as a konbini, and it is, I would say, sort of a very Japanese presence, if you will. And I have to say that my American friends who take trips to Japan, who've visited Japan, always comment about how much they enjoyed going to a convenience store. So a Japanese convenience store, I think, is a really fun place to visit. It is clean. It's not very big. If the American audiences could imagine the Tiger Mart that's attached to gas stations here, it's about that size. But it's very different in that it is also found throughout the country, not just at gas stations, on street corners, sometimes multiple in a single block. And they are a unique and very orderly and organized store. In addition to being able to buy food, a lot of convenience stores, in fact, probably all of them now, carry, for example, stationery, some books, even some articles of clothing, such as underwear, toiletries, certainly, as well as pre-made food, such as obento and rice balls, very Japanese. They're also able to utilize the konbini to pay electric and gas tax bills, as well as purchase tickets to events. They also function as a place where you can mail packages. Now, Dr. Horiguchi had forwarded me this very interesting statistic about the convenience store in Japan, konbinis in Japan. So this novel was published in 2016, and looking at the statistics from that year, there were approximately 54,000 konbini stores in Japan. So that's quite a lot. I don't believe the pandemic has affected that number. In fact, I would think that now we're 4 years later, probably there are more stores than there were back then. And then the revenue in 2016 from all convenience stores in Japan totaled a grand 10 trillion yen. I think that is a little under $100 billion. So it's a huge industry. And there was a total of 17 billion customers in 1 year, that year. So that's the convenience store where most of, or a lot of this novel takes place. So just wanted to talk about that with you a little bit, our guest readers. And so Dr. Bisson, you have experienced visiting Japan several times as an American, and wanted to hear your thoughts on the konbini in Japan.
The konbini I had read about before I went, but I found that I was very pleasantly surprised at how much you can do there and how many different items are there. The hotel we stayed at a lot of times in Otsu, near Kyoto, and right across the street from our super hotel was a Lawson's. And many times when I came back very tired from taking my students to different places, it was really nice to just walk across the street and pick up something from the konbini to eat. And a sandwich, an onigiri, all sorts of cakes and candies, of course, and bottled drinks like water or lemon tea, which is another thing that I very much like to drink as well. Our students also would go there, and I found out, not at Lawson's, but at Family Mart, I could get the money to pay for Skype, to call home to my parents who did not have a computer to communicate with me. And also we found out we could have bought tickets to Studio Ghibli, except you had to go on a certain day. So that ended that right there. But for me, it was the cleanliness, the availability of products that were there, the friendliness of the staff, which is something I noted in the novel about how the staff interacts with the different people who come in and out, and just found it a nice, pleasant experience in Japan for a weary traveler.
Thank you. Doctors Horiguchi or Ekida, anything to add to that?
I would like to add just one thing, that convenience stores cater to many different demographics in Japan, including single people, right? Single persons living in the urban areas. And konbini offers ready-made, very fresh food. They discard food every few hours, right? So they don't keep it for too long. And so it's a really fresh, good, tasty food. And many people go there to get, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And some use it instead of using supermarkets and so on. And I thought that I would mention this because I think it's relevant to the story, which is about the single women living in an urban area.
Thank you. Okay, another background, piece of background information I wanted to add here is a little bit about the book, not the content, but the fact that it has won a very prestigious award in Japan, the Octagoa Award. Now, this award is generally considered one of the two most prestigious literary awards in Japan, the other one being the Naoki Prize, Naoki Sho. And of the two, the Octagoa Award is known as the one that chooses books that belong in this category of Jun Bungaku, or I guess the English translation is pure literature. Another way to describe it is that it has a lot of artistic or artsy components to the descriptions and the narrative and the prose, and also in style and format, there is a uniqueness to it. As for content, my understanding is that often the works chosen have a twist. It is not straightforward. We may even call it a little strange or weird. And just so the people who are tuning in today know, the guest readers and I had the opportunity to talk about this a little bit last week, and I promised them I will not use the words strange and weird so often, but it is very difficult to stay away from those words when talking about this novel. Now, traditionally it was given to new writers, is my understanding, but I think it has changed over the last few years. And often it is awarded to short stories or shorter works of fiction. So again, Dr. Ekida, I think if you wanted to add to that about the Octagoa Award and how this work is a good a piece to have received this award, please.
Okay. Actually, I was prepared for to talk about a little bit of the history of Octagoa Award.
Please.
And then it was actually established in 1935 by Kikuchi-kan, the editor of the Bunge Shunju literary magazines. And it's aimed to honor, as you said, a new talent in memory of Akutagawa Ryunosuke. However, it also sought a commercial gain, so to speak. And after all, Kikuchi-kan was the editor of Bunge Shunju. So, as you know, like the Akutagawa Prize has received much media attention and commercial success as a result. However, it was not the case prior to 1956, when Ishihara Shintaro, the former governor of Tokyo, made a media sensation with his work called what is the name? The Season of the Sun, and he became a recipient of the Akutagawa Awards. And then since then, Akutagawa Award is becoming more like a commercialized, so it's has much more attention to the media, and of course it was welcomed by the publishers as well. And the Ishihara's, the Season of the Suns gave rise to a reckless and carefree expressions of the youth, and then that's kind of like, the media eventually called them as the Sun Tribe, and it's become one of the subcultures emerged in the early post-war Japan. And so, of course, Ishihara made a fortune, not only, from loyalty of his book, but the TV appearance and, as a celebrities. And then those things, kind of started, in 1956. But Murata's convenience stores also enjoyed the media attentions, as you know, and then the commercial success as well. And it sold, according to the book, there is like a book. It said it sold over 1 million of copies. And so, I wanted to mention about that part of Akutagawa Prize, and then whether I like it or not, but it's just really commercialized. And as you mentioned that, the Akutagawa Prize, is for the so-called pure literature. I'm not really sure what is, probably Dr. Horiguchi can, added some more information, but it's much more easier to say the literary fiction versus popular fiction. And Naoki Prize is for the popular literature. But so what does the pure literature or serious literature means? And then Masami's already mentioned about it, but the focus, in Japan at least, so-called pure literature focusing on literary or artistic elements such as, originality of expressions, maybe style, the descriptions of the main characters, and so forth. And then the pure literature does not really deny the good plot, but the focus is more on the theme of the work. So that's how I interpret it. And then this one is actually, well, this is my personal observations, but the Akutagawa Prize often goes to, as Masami said, the works dealt with controversial themes, social issues. So just like, Murata's convenience store woman. So it does not mean the protagonist, Keiko, represent Japanese people or Japanese women. That's something that I wanted to mention about it. And actually, I was, going through some of the judges' comments, and I found that it's kind of interesting. One of the members of the selection committee, Murakami Ryu, stated, in the past decades, I haven't seen a work that portrayed contemporary society so well, like Convenience Store Woman. So I was like, okay, so the Ryu really praised, the Murata's work. And on the other hand, I was kind of surprised to see this, but the Shimada Masahiko, another male writers, criticized the work for the lack of psychological portrait and the weakness in writing. So it was kind of interesting. Maybe like Shimada's point of view, convenience store woman is not, how should I say, not original enough in terms of like styles and writing and expression. And then another thing that I found that was surprising is Takahashi Nobuko, a female member of the selection committee, didn't say anything. She refused to make any comments on the work. So it was kind of interesting, that I wanted to share. And so it was not like, the majority of the members praised her work, but the couple members didn't really approve the Murata's work as an Akutagawa Award.
Yes, I think that even as I read some comments by ordinary readers, like if you go on Amazon or something like that, and I was looking at some of the comments, it seemed to be very split. Readers either loved the book or really thought it was just too strange or just didn't like it. And as you said, Professor Ekida, I think that, this book, certainly among the selection committee, there was a split opinion on whether this book was worthy of the prize or not. I guess enough people voted for her to receive the prize. But nevertheless, as you noted, in the past, I think recipients' books that received this prize were not necessarily bestsellers. But this one clearly has become one. I also wanted to note that this book has been translated into 18 languages around the world, including English. So just to note that. Sorry, Dr. Horiguchi, did you want to add to that?
Just a few words here. I really appreciate Dr. Ekida's explanation of this award. I think that was a brilliant summary of this award and what it means to the writers and readers. So as she was saying that by winning this award, authors and their works of literature receive or earn prestige, recognition, and this all contributes to the sales of their works, right, novels. And Dr. Akida mentioned pure literature, in describing the history of this, award, given to certain works. And I just want to point out that pure literature is considered to be written by historically men, right? And the award selection committee members were all men until 1987. So it was only in 1987, two women, Kono Taeko and Oba Minako, joined this award selection committee. And, this committee has been giving awards to women writers, but I just want to point out that, again, earning this award, winning this award brings so much attention, prestige to these writers. And, we are looking at this female writer, which is, I think, also very important here.
Yeah.
And the Octagoa Award selection committees usually include like contemporary writers and literary critics and the former winners of the prize. So it was kind of, a contradicting, like Kono Taeko won the award in I think it's 1960s, the early 60s, but she didn't serve on the selection committee until 1987. Kono Taeko is such a, prolific and this, well-respected writers, but she was not invited for 24 years. That's kind of surprising. So the Japanese literary circles are really male-dominated. And the selection committee is supposed to be authoritative voices. So the women didn't serve until 1987 is worth noted.
Yeah. I think that is telling about the literary circle as well as maybe the Japanese culture. But I'll leave it at that. So next we're going to transition to starting to talk about the novel itself, because I want to talk a little bit about Murata Sayaka-san, the writer of this novel. And I think Ginger introduced this novel as a semi-autobiographical book story. And I think there's a question about that also, whether it really is about the author or if it's mostly fiction or probably a combination of both. But just to tell our audience about Sayaka Murata, she was born on August 14th, 1979, so she's relatively young. When she won the award, she was in her late 30s. And obviously she is a Japanese writer. She was born in Chiba Prefecture, but later moved to Tokyo and went to university in Tokyo. In addition to this Octagoa Prize, she has won other very prestigious literary awards, such as the Gunzo Prize for New Writers, the Mishima Yukio Prize, and Noma Literary New Face Prize. But as our guest readers have pointed out, it really is the Akutagawa Prize that have pushed her to sort of the as to become one of the main and very important writers of the Japanese literary world today. Now, at the time of the publishing of Convenience Store Woman, and this is where we begin to see some parallels between the main character, Keiko, and the author. At the time of the publishing, as I said, she was in her late 30s, but she still lived with her parents. That is, Murata Sayaka-san did. And by the way, her father is a judge and her mother is a homemaker, based on what I read. And she did write from experience to at least some extent, we know, because at the time of the writing, and at the time of the writing of some other novels prior to this work, she herself worked at several convenience stores part-time. And in a New York Times interview that I read, she talked about how it was very convenient to work at a convenience store part-time because it really helped her with her schedule and writing. I think I read that she would get up at 2 a.m., write until 8 a.m., at which point she went and did her shift at the convenience store, and then got back at some point in the late afternoon and then write till dinner time or something like this. Now, incidentally, after she won the Octagoa Prize, I think, obviously, as our readers have pointed out, because she probably at that point had many requests to publish lots of new works, she did quit her job at the convenience store and became a full-time writer. But in any event, when she was writing this novel, she was still working at a convenience store as a convenience store woman herself. And in fact, she worked part-time at a convenience store for a period of close to 18 years. Again, I think that is exactly what Keiko, the main character, did. And she started while she was a college student. So one of the questions I wanted to explore was whether Sayaka Murata, the author, is actually Keiko Furukura, the main character in this book. So I guess I will also just bring up some larger topics that I'd like our guest readers to just freely discuss with us today. In addition to that big question, when we look at the story, I want to talk a little bit about the title. And again, for the benefit of our English-speaking readers, I wanted to point out that the Japanese original title is Convenience Store Human versus Convenience Store Woman. And as the guest readers and I talked about last week, the ring of the Japanese title has a very sort of metallic or a non-human ring, if you will. And the nuance being that the convenience store person or convenience store human is very robotic in nature, sort of automated. Now we're getting into sort of the meat of the story here. So I'll leave it at that. So the other things I want to talk about with you today is what is normal, as illustrated by this book. Now, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question, I guess. Is Keiko normal? Who is normal in the novel? Is there anyone that's normal? Hint, hint. So let's just have an open discussion about each of these topics. I know that was a lot there, but I think they're all interrelated. So I didn't want to necessarily just focus on one question at a time. So anyone who wants to start, please.
May I say a few words here about the author?
Oh, please. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so as Ms. Tyson was saying, yes, this author was working at the convenience store for 18 years, from age 18 to 36, and that overlaps with the character, Keiko. And so it is true that the author used the material from her own life experiences, what was available to her, right? But we have to remind ourselves that this is a novel and this is a fiction, and the character Keiko is not the author. And this is something we discuss in literature studies quite a bit. But I think as readers, we want to always know the intention of the author, what she meant, what she wanted to convey, and so on. And of course, it is natural for us to want to know the intention. But first of all, it's very hard to know her intention, even if she gives that out in interviews. She may be doing something that is, unconscious on her part, when it comes to writing. She also says that she lets her writing develop itself, So the author is not always in control of what's in the novel or how it is interpreted, right? So in other words, the author's intention does not exclusively determine the meaning of the text, because there are always readers' interpretations of the text. So that's something I would like us to sort of remember. As Ms. Tyson said, yes, the character is very robotic and mechanical, right? But we, of course, know the author is very creative. She's known to be very provocative and often subversive. So I just wanted to just throw that in there.
Thank you. Also, sorry, I thought that for the benefit of the audience members who have not yet had a chance to read this novel, I just wanted to mention, so this book is about, as we've been saying, a woman who works at a convenience store part-time. Keiko is her name. And another thing to know about this character is that she is a little bit of a misfit in society. But somehow, through her role at the convenience store, she's able to act, quote, more normally, fit in. And in fact, what she does is she sometimes imitates some of her coworkers, both in the way she dresses or the way she speaks, even her intonation and tone and word choice. Another big issue in this book is that those around her, however, want her to be more, quote, normal. And some of those characters are, for example, her younger sister, who is married and has a child and who is, quote, more normal. Her parents also come out in the novel both as flashback and also in the present. And then we find out later in the novel that even her coworkers had wanted her to be more normal, but, sort of allowed her to be a little odd and was okay with that. And then there's this male, I don't know if he's an antagonist or another protagonist, again, a very strange character. Who Shiraha is his name, who really is very critical of Keiko and her ways, and really tries to, I think, put her down because he himself is so odd and is not feeling right about it. So that is sort of the gist of the story. I'll leave the ending until later in the discussion. Any other points about the sort of main storyline that I've left out that our audience should be aware of as we talk further about this?
No, I think that's, wonderful what you said about the text. I think we have a lot to talk about that. Just one more thing about the author's style of writing or her topics. She writes a lot about gender relations, sex, giving birth, and family. She also writes about eating food. So, just we can keep that in mind as, we discuss this text. It's about, many of those things.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, she's never been in a relationship, not even a sexual relationship ever. But by the way, it doesn't bother her at all. And it seems to be that she tries to act like a normal person only because other people want her to. So that's sort of the interesting component of who she is too. So let's go back to the first question, and then it's totally fine for us to move between topics that I've already mentioned. So Dr. Horiguchi has already reminded us that Sayaka Murata is probably not this main character and vice versa. This is a work of fiction. She probably did use her experiences to create this character, and obviously her description of the Konbini life probably comes from experience. So against that background, let's talk about Keiko, the character. So just your thoughts on her, and what should we do about this very odd woman? Should she? Do we say what is wrong with her, or do we accept her? Where are our thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to kind of go first here. One of the things I noted about the character was that there was a sense of menace with her. And that was really based on when their first questions come up about whether or not she is normal when she is a child in elementary school. And there was a fight going on, and someone yelled, "Stop that fight." It was a fight between two boys. And she picked up a spade and hit one of the boys over the head, apparently knocking him out. And of course, everyone was yelling at her not to do that. And her parents had, and later in a flashback, she mentions how her parents came to talk to the people at school, the principal and so forth, about what to do about her. And then there was another occasion where I guess she was a first-year teacher to the small children, got very upset. And so she wanted to make her stop crying. And so she went and jerked down her skirt and her knickers, which knickers in English means your underpants.
That's correct, yeah.
And so I think when people read that, they're kind of surprised. So there was another kind of, let's say, mark against her in that case. And once again, her parents were summoned, and she was sent off to therapy because it had to be assumed that she lived in a bad home, and this is why she was not normal. And she even talked about visiting her sister when her nephew was a baby and the baby was crying. And her sister said, "Oh, the baby cries all the time." And she happened to see a small knife and thinks, "I can end that crying very quickly with the knife." And so you always had that. But I think that's because she felt like she was not fitting into other people's ideas of what is normal. And there's one quote I would like to read that's a little later in the novel that also reflects on this perhaps menace, when she said that when something was strange, everyone thought they had the right to come stomping in all over your life to figure out why. I found that arrogant and infuriating, not to mention a pain in the neck. Sometimes I even wanted to hit them with a shovel to shut them up. And so she found it's like the convenience store is able to, let's say, box her in literally to keep her from perhaps flying apart. And in that sense, that's the way she's going to become normal. So I'm going to stop there and hope anyone else wants to jump in and have their thoughts as well.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Ekida, do you have anything to say? I have a lot to say, so I shouldn't be talking.
Actually, it was kind of interesting, like, Murata chose that, early memory of, like, when exactly she felt, herself not being fit into, the society, whatever the society called normal. When I think about it, it's like, she just literally act on the request, stop the fight, and then she did it. So she doesn't really understand, like, well, I did the service, and then, like, why people are, like, yelling at me, and then so there is disconnections, and then also it seems like the adult doesn't really understand what's going on, and then it's just there's like a fixed norm, and then they just impose upon her, so without asking her, so does it make sense or not? And then so that was, to me, was like the triggers, like the beginning of her kind of like removed from the societies, or like, remove herself from being related to others. And then it seems like, she was so afraid to cause trouble, and because she cannot figure out, what makes trouble to her family or her sister, or like, teachers and so forth. So I don't know. Yes, she is a kind of strange character, but I think we can talk more about, like, later in the stories, but I can't really say, like, what is normal and what is right. That was, like, Masami's questions, but her normal or her right doesn't match to the majority of the people. And does it make her wrong? That's kind of like a question that, like, Murata is posing to the audience. I mean, the reader, I think.
Yes, for sure.
Right. So, this specific text, the convenience store women, and this specific character, Keiko, right, we can explore further, about them, right, about their psychology, the behavior, how abnormal and outrageous she can be in the story. But I just wanted to put this text within the larger context of Japan in order to sort of give insight to, normal versus abnormal, right? And bear with me, I may say a bit here. So let's put this text again within the social, economic, and political context of Japan at this time. And politics, I mean power relationship, and specifically gender relations in Japan. So as Ms. Tyson explained to us, right, this novel was written in 2016. It's a single woman who's 36 years old, who's been working at the convenience store all these years, 18 years, as a part-time worker. And this is considered to be not normal, right? And part-time work doesn't mean short hours of work. She works long hours, but it means that this is not a career path, to raise and promotions and so on. She doesn't want that, right? And she has no romantic relations, no sexual relations, and no interest in marriage, right? So in the Japanese context, how normal or abnormal is this, right? So I looked at some results of surveys conducted by the Japanese government. And in 2016, nearly 40% of the workforce are made up by part-time workers. Most of them are women. And these government officials find, sexless society, low marriage rate and low birth rate as a national problem, right? It's a problem for the nation state because it means, decline in the workforce, economic production, right? And that, eventually means the status of Japan in the global stage, right? And so on. So I looked at the numbers, data, statistics prepared or published by the Japanese government. So demographic, right? 18 years old to 34 years old. These are single women, right? And this overlaps with this character, Keiko. 50% of these women have no romantic relationships. 40% of women in this demographic, 18 to 34, have never had sex. And 60% of women in late 20s in Japan at this time are unmarried, and 25% of women in their late 30s are unmarried. And if we focus on Tokyo, 2/3 of the residences are occupied by single occupants. These are students, women, and married men, but who are living by themselves because their wives and children are living in other prefectures. Men are in Tokyo because of their job, right? So again, if we put this story, convenience store women, in this larger context of Japanese society, right? Of course, Keiko is abnormal in many ways and outrageous in many ways. But if you look at her status, right? As a single woman in this age group with none of these, none of the interest in all these things, right? Sex, romance, marriage, and so on, she is not so abnormal, it seems, right? One of the questions for me is that, is this novel a reflection of Japanese society at this time? Or does the novel negotiate with other sort of dominant, texts or discourse in the dominant context of the time, right? Those contexts that surround this text, how do they negotiate with one another? I think that's an interesting question for the readers too.
So, Dr. Horiguchi, are you suggesting then that Keiko is actually normal?
I think what I'm suggesting is this is a sort of a satirical work. It's a satire or parody that sort of uses imitation and exaggeration, ridicule and irony to point out what is considered to be normal. Mm-hmm. And then that leads to us readers raising questions about what is the norm, what is normal, and how that is constructed and performed, right? It's a performance, right? This woman has to act upon this manuscript, or manual, mm-hmm. or scripts, right? Mm-hmm. She has to use them to perform what is normal, right?
Right.
This normal convenience store worker.
Right.
But as Dr. Bisson was saying, that underneath this surface of, normalcy, what is constructed as normal, seems to be violence that is sort of hidden and suppressed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just a very disturbing work. I find many parts of the book very funny and humorous, but also very disturbing.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Dark, for sure. And I want to go back to that point about the passage and references that Dr. Bisson was making about just these weird episodes, very extreme episodes. These were flashbacks to her childhood, but also in the present, these moments when she would really make comments that are just really outside the ordinary. And so that's juxtaposed against what you, Dr. Horiguchi, has just so eloquently pointed out to us, that is quite normal on the surface. Like if you just look at the statistics and you look at her profile, if you will, like, so if you weren't interacting with her, if you weren't aware of these, isolated episodes of violence. And there's other weird things in the novel, like the way she is just so not interested in eating. She calls eating, food, like feed, doesn't she? Like as if it's for an animal. So there's those real extremes elements. But if you didn't know her as a person and you weren't interacting with her and you were just reading on paper who she was, as Dr. Horiguchi just pointed out, she is quite normal. She is sort of your average Japanese 30-something woman. So I guess one of the things the writer is trying to show us is, I guess, pretty deep in one way. It's really not what you can see on the surface level on one hand, but on the other hand, these episodes of oddity and strangeness is not what really is what makes up that whole person either. So then let's talk about another woman in the novel, her sister. Let's use her sister as an example. As I said, she's a younger sister, she's married, she has a baby, and she's the one that really pushes Keiko to become more normal. In fact, she coaches Keiko, right? And tells her, this is what you should say if people ask you why you've been working at a konbini part-time for 18 years. And she makes up an excuse, right? Like a reason for her, which Keiko then uses. Something to do with she's not very strong, she has some health issues, so she can't really hold down a full-time job. So this sister, is she the more normal person? Because Dr. Horiguchi, I believe a lot of those numbers you were reading out, it was like 40%, 50%, are single women, which means the other half are married and presumably some have children. So then the sister is also a normal person, is she not?
Yes, very much so. So her sister and her friends, right, who tell Keiko that she should get married and give birth to a child and so on, right? So this is very prescriptive, right? This sort of life, married life with children is supposed to be the norm. That's what they think, her sister and her friends. And they clearly make it prescriptive to others, right? Because they preach as others and so on. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have marriage or children, you have to have a serious career. But then Keiko doesn't have that either, right? So, but these normal people, right? They contribute to society and the nation. In the novel, it's called The Village, right? By Shiraha. Mm-hmm. And Shiraha says, the uterus and even sperm, I don't know what the English translation in the book is. I read the original, but they also belong to the village, right? Mm-hmm. So that can be read as a reference to what individuals in Japan are supposed to do, again, for society and nation. So again, it is on the one hand considered to be the norm, and yet it's so, how they speak about this is so outrageous and funny too. I think it just makes the readers think, about sort of a strangeness of this normalcy.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, it's not the normalcies, but the majority, like the younger sister is definitely a majority. But at the same time, the normalcies that they were doing is more like imposing what they think is right to the others. And then actually Keiko doesn't do that. Like Keiko never say like, you are supposed to do this and that, except like, the routine of the convenience store to be in a certain way. But I think, both Keiko and Shiraha is rejecting that, the pressure for the conformity. You have to be in our territory, our side, and then you have to be in certain way based on what we think is right. And then I feel like Keiko and then Shiraha is really resisting against that pressure.
Right, right. You know, I want to just bring up two very Japanese concepts and talk about that a little bit in the context of this novel. The first is the concept of meiwaku, okay? And so that's translated as, if you are causing meiwaku to somebody, you are causing trouble to somebody, including everything from, you know, discomfort, just feelings, to actual inconvenience to somebody. And, you know, in the Japanese version, I do believe there are several times when Keiko says, well, I am not causing meiwaku to anybody, so leave me alone, is essentially what she's saying. And I found it very compelling what Dr. Akita just said, which is she doesn't impose anything on anybody. And she's just going about her own business. Not only that, she's a very productive member of society, if you think about it. She is a very good convenience store worker, as it comes out many times throughout the novel. The other Japanese concept I wanted to talk about is sekente, okay, which is, again, translated, it's sort of like, what would people think of me? You know, and so, you know, people say, or like maybe my parents would have said to me, if I were an unmarried single woman in my 40s, sekente ga warui. You know, it's kind of bad. You look bad, or we look bad because we're your parents and we haven't been able to marry off our daughter. Okay, so it's that concept. And I believe that term comes out a lot in the language of the sister. And she's concerned about that on behalf of her sister, Keiko, but also for herself, probably. You know, she's worried about what other people might think of her and her family to have a family member like Keiko. So just wanted to throw that out to you, and how these two concepts really follow the novel and the storyline. And perhaps that is something, both concepts, what the writer is trying to say, this is just not a good idea anymore in Japan, perhaps.
So I really appreciate Ms. Tyson, what you said. And I want to just touch upon conformity. So Dr. Ekida also mentioned this. So clearly, Keiko's sister and her friends are very conformist, right? They know what they're expected to do in society. They get married, give birth to children, and and so on. So Keiko is very indifferent to all these things, and so she goes on her own way. And in that sense, maybe it's a very different lifestyle. And yet, I find Keiko's world, right? This world of convenience store is also very conformist, right? Convenience store is where she is reborn, right? As repeated in the novel, where she sort of functions, and this is her habitat, right? And there's a reference to her normal. This is where she can become normal cog in society. And this is where she can become the same as other convenient store workers, right? And this is a place where all the differences are erased, right? So there are other people who work here, different ethnicity and race. There's a Vietnamese person, somebody from Myanmar, but they use the same language used in the convenience store by these workers. They wear the same clothes, they behave the same way, right? So all the differences are erased, and Keiko can also become just the same as other people. So in that regard, again, I find that to be very conformative to Japanese society.
One thing that I was kind of like, posing a question to the other readers as well, but when you think about like traditional value, like traditional families, or like, what the woman should be, I felt like, those kind of like a norm was already gone long time ago. Like how many people have like, couples and then, the children's, and then of course I grew up in the rural area. The village norm was supposed to be like your parents live nearby, you married to like, somebody who are like, in the village, like, close by, and then like, you raise children, and then the children, see their grandparents, the whole family is like raising the children together. It's already missed. It doesn't exist. And then when we are talking about like, okay, so the marriage, but how many single women in Japanese contemporary society, the number goes up quite a bit in the past decades or so. And then also we have social issues like hikikomori, the social withdrawal. And then we know that more male tend to become hikikomori than female. And then shiraha is a kind of like a hikikomori, right? And then it was very interesting. I mean, of course, Shiraha is not a very interesting character because he was kind of like a broken radios and then keep repeating the same thing. But like what he said repeatedly is very interesting. And then he accused the woman, is like, accused Keiko is like, well, those women, you have been parasite. The man has like much harder life, and then we have to work and we have to earn the wage, and then we have to like, taking care of the children. So it was kind of, he's a very interesting character because he was really convinced that, I'm going to hide from the societies, and then somebody's going to take care of me, and then I'm gonna becoming like a parasite of the woman. It was very interesting character to me.
So he says the opposite, or he does the opposite of what he insists. So thank you for bringing up Shiraha, because I'm just watching the time and I want to make sure we cover two more things. One is Shiraha and what to make of him and where does he fit in to all of this. The other is, of course, I do want to talk about the ending. So again, for the benefit of those who have not yet had a chance to read this novel, very quickly, what happens is Shiraha is this male character that comes into Keiko's life as a co-worker initially, but it turns out that he is so he's an even bigger misfit in some ways than Keiko, and he gets promptly fired from his part-time job at the konbini. But there's a series of very strange and interesting conversations that happen between the two characters, and they end up living together. And by the way, it's not a romantic relationship at all. But I'll leave it at that. And as a result of that relationship, Shiraha essentially forces Keiko to quit her job at the convenience store and makes her try to apply for actual full-time jobs because, as Dr. Ekida said, he wants her to support him. So he moves into her apartment, and then now he wants her to earn a living for both of them. But at the very final scene, what happens is they happen upon a convenience store, and at that point there is a realization on Keiko's part. Before we move into that final scene, I'd like to hear your comments on Shiraha and what he represents.
I'm gonna go ahead and just briefly comment. For me, you could think of him as a freeloader and a possible hikikomori, because I think he does bear those marks of being one and everything. But I also think in a sense he wants her to follow through to a certain amount of normalcy by getting her to have the better paying job. And that way she would support him, and then it would kind of be a role reversal. In the sense that she would be the one to go out and seek a job that paid well, and he would be the stay-at-home. The women were expected to stay at home and be wives and mothers. He's not going to be a mother, obviously, I mean, even a father for that matter, because they decided they don't want to have children. But that's the way it would be. And so he would be seen as the parasite, whereas she would be seen as the productive one. But in the end, I was wondering if that's also a comment on the gender relations and this idea of normalcy, that the woman stays home to be wife and mother and the man goes out. So I'm going to leave my comment there and see what everybody.
Right. So his remarks are quite, I think, interesting and important. What he says is, again, very outrageous. He basically tells Keiko that, she should, get married and give birth, but then she's not attractive enough, and she won't be able to do that. She's too old, age 36, and she's not a candidate for any of this, and he has no interest in having sex with her and anything like that.
It's really terrible. He's a terrible character.
Right. But it's terrible and outrageous, but it's something that is familiar to many readers. This is something that many women hear living in contemporary Japan. It comes from the government officials, and regular people may not go to this extent, but they sort of suggest all these things oftentimes, right? So I think Shiraha's remarks expose that part of Japanese society, and I think because it's just so outrageous, it just raises again questions about expectations on gender roles, right? For both women and men, because he clearly doesn't want to, carry out the roles expected on men in Japan. But yes, I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that, Murata created this, Shiraha's character. And then I don't have an answer for it, but it's very interesting, like, how she depicted the male, male character in her stories. And then I think in certain extent, I don't know much about in Tokyo because I grew up in the countryside, but it's sometimes like, the society, like Sekente, that as Masami mentions, they have, equal expectation to male, like what they are supposed to be doing. Like, for instance, well, if the female, let's say the girls didn't go to college and then it's okay, but your son didn't go to college, and then there are certain type of like social stigma, like the man's supposed to be earning like, this and this, and then you have to get married, and then once you get married, and then finally you are accepted as like a proper adult male type of thing. So it's of course, it's a very as I mentioned before, like, he repeats the same thing, like, broken radio. So it's not a very interesting character, but it's kind of interesting how Murata constructs the narrative and plot in a way that, Shiraha is a trigger for her to change a little bit at the end of the story.
Yes. Thank you for that comment. And that's a great transition to let's talk about the ending. Okay. I'd like to spend the next five minutes or so talking about that, and then we'll go on to some questions that I see here the audience has posed. So as I mentioned earlier, what happens at the end is Keiko is forced to leave her beloved job at the konbini by Shiraha, but then on her way to a job interview, which again Shiraha has forced her to go to, they happen to stop by a convenience store. And what happens after that is Keiko feels like that's where she belongs. And I think there's a realization at the end, and I think there is finally a deliberate and very intentional choice made by Keiko. Although it's not a surprising choice, because I do think that throughout the novel, her love, or at least her affinity or her need for the konbini to make her who she is very strong and consistent throughout. But in the context of that ending, I want to ask each of you, is this a happy ending? You can also comment on, is this a happy novel? Or is it a dark novel? Any thoughts, final thoughts on the final scene as well as the book itself and the messaging, please.
When I read the convenience store women, for the first time, I didn't really, take it as anything that is, a happy or but only one thing that I can point out, as Dr. Horiguchi mentioned about it, like the convenience stores, and then she's kind of like going back to the robot, right? It's routine, manual conversations and everything, but at least she openly say to no to those social pressure. Like, I don't care what my sister thinks, I don't care what the Shirafa thinks, but this is my choice. And then in that sense, she changed a little bit. She said, clearly said no to the peer pressure or social pressure.
So, if I may, I think Keiko is happy, right? In the novel, to go back to the convenience store and just, resume working there again. But many readers are disturbed by her choice, and I'm one of them. If I look at some readers' comments, many are sort of, quite terrified after, going through this novel and finishing it. And, as I was saying before, I think this novel is very provocative but not corrective. It doesn't mention anything that, what the correct form of living in society is. But I cannot help but think, about an alternative society to the two different sort of worlds, or perhaps they are similar in some ways, depicted in this novel. Right? So alternative world is where individual bodies are not uniform, or mechanical or inorganic. Individual bodies are not just the mechanical part of the village or the convenience store, right? Both can be read as like a microcosm of Japan, right? I think alternative world is where the differences are recognized and they coexist without being, differences do not have to be sort of eliminated or corrected or cured, right? As there's a repeated reference to Keiko, who has to be cured because she's so different. So when I think about that kind of alternative world, it's just very disturbing to me to read that, everyone goes back to, or Keiko goes back to this very conformist place, and then the other world in the novel is, of course, another very conformist world. But anyhow, that's what I responded, how I responded to the ending.
I think, Dr. Horiguchi, that's a very interesting perspective. Then there's really no good answer. Either way, you're doomed, to use a very dramatic word, because her choice was her own. But the end result was that she went back to being a piece of this machine called Konbini, and she can only be who she is through it. And then if she had chosen to do what Shiraha wanted, number one, it's not her own choice, and number two, what's the alternative, like you said? So that's a very, very dark view, but a good one.
And I would like to add that it is a dark ending, in my opinion, because it sounds like she is absorbed by a machine in that sense. And she says, I couldn't stop hearing the store telling me the way I wanted to be, what I needed, and how she kept hearing the voice of the store. And so when Shiraha tries to pull her out, he says to her, you're not human. And she thought, that's what I've been trying to tell you. And that's a sad comment, that she didn't feel not just normalized, but as a human being, again, trying to seek this place in the world for herself. And that's, like I said, that's dark when you get to that kind of an ending.
But can I say one more thing? Sorry, but actually, like, you know, who is going to be not the cloak of the society? Like parents, you know, little sisters, but it's almost like, you know, every one of us is somewhat is like the cloak of the society. Like whether you find that, you know, space, you know, your safe place, you know, for instance, for me, it's probably the university as a teacher. And then I feel like, okay, so I'm happy, you know, I feel like I fit in this, you know, world. But I don't know, are we so different from Keiko or not? I'm just trying to be a devil's advocate. But.
No, that's absolutely everything you said, each of you said is true. And so that is a dark reading, but I think it's an inevitable reading and perspective of the world we live in. So I did read also in one of her interviews that the writer actually said that one of the things she wanted to illustrate in this book is how odd the people who believe they are ordinary or normal actually are. So maybe nobody is normal, nobody is odd. It's just different parts of the society, and as Dr. Akita said, that's who we are. We're each parts of this world, which again we could put that in a view that's very, very positive. But I think this novel in totality is quite a dark one. And as Dr. Horiguchi said, I think a satire. Another way to describe this book, I think, is it's a hyperbole. There's a lot of irony and really sort of trying to illustrate the oddity of people who think they're normal. And how normal some people who are labeled as odd actually are. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'm going to take some of these questions here, and thank you for those who have written them here. The first one is actually a comment who says, one of the people in the audience says, her son Parker is a former student of Dr. Horiguchi, and he is now a teacher in Oita Prefecture, and he loves it and loves Japanese convenience stores. So she wanted to say thank you to Dr. Horiguchi for encouraging him. And I think what I should do is really connect you, Dr. Horiguchi, to this person, and perhaps you can continue this conversation. She also wants to ask you for some resources to learn more Japanese language. She'd like to impress her son, she says. The next question is a funny one, especially if you haven't read the book, because the question is this: would someone ever spend time in a bathtub like described in the novel? So again, for the benefit of those who haven't read the book, this very odd character, Shiraha, who moves in with Keiko, actually ends up spending a lot of time in the bathtub. And he just hangs out there, and he actually eats his meals there, and again, very odd. So can anyone take that question, please? Can someone take that question? Is that normal for a Japanese person?
First of all, I think it's in reference to how small an apartment can be in Tokyo. Very, very narrow space. Mm-hmm. But also there's of course this distinction between human beings and animals, and then also blurring the line that distinguishes human beings and animals. And I think there's a reference to Shiraha, who moves into the apartment as an animal or pet or cat or dog, I don't remember. And the food that she gives him is feed, right? And she mm-hmm. puts him, or he stays in the bathroom. That may be something that the owners do to their pets sometimes. But that's what I just can think of in that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly not the norm to spend so much time in a bathtub. Okay, I think we are really getting close to the end of our time here. I just want to thank again our guest readers for your great insights and thoughts. And I feel like we could keep talking about this very interesting novel. I think I've come full circle. When I first read it, I thought, oh, this is just very strange. And then I read it a couple more times, and as we talk about it, I think there is a lot in there. It's only about 160 pages long, so if those of you who have joined us, if there are those who haven't read it yet, I think I would encourage you to do so. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Horiguchi, Dr. Bisson, and Dr. Akida. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ginger.
Thank you, Masami. Thanks to everybody, Dr. Bisson, Dr. Akida, Dr. Horiguchi. That was such an interesting conversation. We really appreciate you joining us this evening. So many things to think and talk about. It makes me want to go back and read the book again, too. I want to remind everyone that everybody who attended today's session is eligible to win a $50 gift card. After the session, we'll use a random number generator to select the winner, and we'll email the winner's name to everyone on the webinar today. And we would like to invite you to join us this Thursday, November 12th at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time for our last 2020 Women's Leadership Forum session. To register and for more information, just go to www.jastin.org. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a very nice night. Thanks.